She could have defended herself. She could have fought back. But she chose prayer instead. And when she did, God exposed everything.
There are moments in life when you can do everything right and still find yourself treated like you don't belong, not because you failed, but because something around you isn't built on truth. And in those moments, you're faced with a choice: fight it or place it in God's hands. Lenora Whitaker had made that choice long before this night. At 60 years old, after raising 6 children, she had learned something most people don't learn until life forces them to. Lord, you take care of what I can't see. And the night before her son Caleb's wedding, she would have to trust that more than ever. It started quietly: a glance, a tone, a feeling she couldn't explain. Vanessa Hale stood across the room in a soft cream dress, smiling for everyone else. Graceful, polished, admired. But when her eyes met Lenora's, something behind that smile didn't feel right. Lenora had tried to brush it off before. She had prayed about Vanessa more times than she could count. At the kitchen table, in her rocking chair before bed, even sitting in church while the choir sang. She would whisper, Lord, if this is not right, please don't let it stand. Because she knew something her children were still learning. God does not ignore what is hidden, and he does not bless what is built on the wrong foundation. Still, she never pushed, never accused, never tried to come between her son and the woman he loved. Because love, real love, gives people room to hear God for themselves. But that night, God wasn't whispering anymore. Lenora stood at the entrance of the rehearsal dinner, holding a worn leather photo album close to her chest. Inside it were pieces of Caleb's life, his first steps, his school pictures, the note he wrote her when he was 10 that said, Mum, I'm going to grow up and take care of you. She had poured weeks into it, not for recognition, not for attention, but because love remembers. She spotted Vanessa near the doorway and gently walked toward her. Baby, Lenora said softly, offering the photo album. I made this for you and Caleb. Something you can look through tonight. Vanessa didn't take it. She didn't even look down at it. Instead, she stepped closer, too close, and in a voice so quiet no one else could hear. She said something that didn't just hurt. It shifted everything. After tomorrow, Vanessa whispered, her smile never moving. You're not part of this family anymore. Time didn't slow down. It stopped. Lenora felt it deep, not just in her heart, but in her spirit. That same place where peace had always lived now felt struck. She searched Vanessa's face, hoping, praying that maybe she misunderstood. But what she saw wasn't confusion. It was certainty, cold, deliberate, final. And in that moment, Lenora understood something she hadn't fully allowed herself to accept before. This wasn't just a personality difference. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was something deeper, something that didn't come from love. Vanessa leaned back slightly, her voice still calm, almost amused. You've done your part, she said softly. You raised him. A small pause. Now he's mine. The words hung in the air like something heavy and wrong, and for a brief moment, Lenora felt something rise in her chest. Not just hurt, not just sadness, but the kind of anger that tempts you to respond, to defend, to fight. But she didn't, because at 60 years old, after everything she had walked through, She had learned the difference between a battle you fight and a battle you hand to God. So instead of reacting, instead of raising her voice, instead of saying everything she had the right to say, Lenora Whitaker did something far more powerful. She went silent, and deep inside, where no one else could hear, she prayed, Lord, you see this. A breath. You see everything I don't. Another breath. If this is not from you, her fingers tightened gently around the photo album. Don't let it stand. Because one thing Lenora knew, as sure as she knew her own name, God may be patient, but he is not blind. And what was about to happen the very next day would prove it, because by noon, that wedding would be over before it ever truly began. And this time, Lenora wouldn't have to say a word. Long before that night, before the wedding, before Vanessa Hale ever stepped into their lives, Lenora Whitaker had already lived a story most people would never survive. She hadn't planned to raise 6 children on her own. No woman ever does. But life has a way of shifting. And when it did, Lenora didn't fall apart. She fell to her knees. Not once. Not just when things got hard. But over and over and over again. Because when her world changed, God didn't. There were nights she would sit at the edge of her bed, hands tired, body worn, bills stacked higher than her strength, and still whisper, Lord, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I trust that you will. And somehow, he always did. Food showed up when it shouldn't have. Bills stretched when numbers didn't make sense. Strength came on days she had nothing left. Not because life was easy, but because she had learned something most people don't learn until much later. God doesn't always remove the pressure, but he will carry you through it. Her children grew up watching that, not just hearing about God, but seeing him move. They saw her pray over groceries, pray over report cards, pray over fevers in the middle of the night, pray when money was tight, and pray when things were good. And every time, she would remind them, God is not just someone we talk about on Sunday. He's someone we walk with every day. Caleb Whitaker, her 3rd child, carried that especially close. He wasn't the loudest, not the most rebellious, not the one who needed constant correction. He was the one who watched, listened, learned, the one who would sit quietly at the table while Lenora prayed, and then ask questions later. Real questions, deep questions. Mum, how do you know God hears you? And Lenora would smile, that soft, knowing smile, and say, because he answers, just not always the way we expect. That answer stayed with him. It followed him through school, through long nights of studying, through the moment he decided he wanted to become a lawyer, not for status, not for money, but because one night, when he was still young, he had watched his mother fight a battle she couldn't win on her own, and God had stepped in. Mum, he had told her once, years later, I want to protect people the way you protected us. She never forgot that, because she knew that wasn't just a dream, that was purpose. So when Caleb introduced Vanessa Hale 3 years ago, Lenora didn't go into it guarded. She went into it hopeful. Because any woman her son chose, she wanted to love. She wanted to gain a daughter, not lose a son. And at first, everything looked right. Vanessa was polished, confident, put together, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and instantly be noticed. She spoke well, dressed well, carried herself like someone who had a plan for her life. And Caleb, He was drawn to that. After years of working hard, staying focused, building a future. Vanessa felt like the reward, but Lenora didn't see reward. She felt resistance, not loud, not obvious, but present. It showed up in little things, the way Vanessa would smile at her in public, but go quiet when they were alone, the way conversations would shift, away from family, away from faith, and always circle back to success, money, image. The way she once laughed softly and said, "I just think some people get too caught up in all that spiritual stuff." It was said lightly, almost playfully, but something in Lenora's spirit didn't receive it lightly at all, because she knew something Vanessa didn't seem to understand yet. You can build a life on appearance, but if God is not in it, it will not stand. Still, Lenora said nothing, because she had also learned something else over the years. Not every warning is meant to be spoken out loud. Some are meant to be taken to God. And that's exactly what she did, night after night, without anyone seeing, without anyone knowing. She prayed, "Lord, if this is the woman you have for Caleb, then give me peace." A pause, a breath. "But if it's not," her voice would soften, "don't let him walk into something that will break him." And every time she prayed that, peace didn't come, but she didn't push, didn't interfere, didn't try to control the outcome. Because faith doesn't force, it trusts. But what she didn't realize was just how close everything was to being exposed, because the signs she had been quietly praying over were about to collide with truth in a way no one could stop. And it wouldn't start at the wedding. It had already begun. The closer the wedding got, the harder it became for Lenora to ignore what her spirit had been trying to tell her all along. Because what once felt like small, passing moments started becoming patterns. And patterns are harder to explain away. It showed up in ways that others might overlook. But Lenora didn't. Not because she was suspicious, but because she had spent a lifetime learning how God speaks in the quiet. One evening, just a few months before the wedding, Lenora had invited Caleb and Vanessa over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a simple meal, the kind she had made for her children their whole lives. The table was set, candles lit, the house filled with that familiar warmth that only comes from years of love being poured into the same walls. And for a moment, everything felt normal, until it didn't. Vanessa took one look at the table and smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. "Oh, this is sweet," she said lightly. A small pause. "We don't really eat like this anymore, but it's cute." Cute. The word landed gently, but it didn't feel gentle. Caleb didn't notice. He was already sitting down, talking about work, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. But Lenora felt it. Not offense, not pride. Just that same quiet nudge in her spirit. Something isn't right. Still, she didn't react, because she wasn't trying to win a moment. She was trusting God with the outcome. But the moments kept coming. On Caleb's birthday, she stayed up late baking his favorite cake, chocolate with crunchy white frosting and homemade hot fudge sauce in a separate bowl, the same dessert she had made every year since he was a boy. When she brought it out, Caleb smiled, that same boyish smile he had always had. But Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Oh, he's actually cutting back on sugar now," she said smoothly. I'll make sure he doesn't mess up his routine. She reached for the knife and quietly set the scrumptious dessert aside, like it didn't matter, like it had never mattered. And something in Lenora's chest tightened, not because of the dessert, but because of what it represented. A slow, subtle, steady removal of memory, of connection, of place. And for the first time, Lenora didn't just feel concern. She felt grief, because she could see what Caleb couldn't yet. This wasn't just a relationship growing. It was something else, taking over. And still, she didn't interfere. Because every time her heart wanted to step in, her spirit would whisper, "Trust me." So she did, even when it got harder, even when the distance grew. Wedding plans moved forward quickly, but Lenora wasn't included. Not in the dress fittings, not in the food tastings, not even in the small conversations that usually bring families together. When she gently offered to help, Vanessa would smile politely and say, "Oh, don't worry. We've got everything handled." Handled, like there was no place for her, like she had already been quietly removed before the wedding even happened. Caleb didn't see it that way. To him, everything was just moving fast, exciting, busy. And when Lenora would ask small questions, he would reassure her. "Mom, everything's good. Vanessa just likes things organized." And she would nod, smile, let it go. Because love sometimes waits, even when it sees ahead. But what weighed on her the most wasn't the distance. It was the shift. Faith, once a natural part of Caleb's life, became quieter, less present. Church attendance turned into, "We'll go next week." Prayer before meals became rushed or forgotten. And when Lenora gently mentioned it once, Vanessa had laughed softly. "I just think faith is more personal, not something that needs to be done all the time." It sounded reasonable, but it felt off, because Lenora knew faith isn't something you visit, it's something you live, and slowly, without confrontation, without argument. That part of Caleb's life was fading, and still, Lenora didn't fight, because she wasn't called to control him. She was called to cover him. So she prayed harder, not out of fear, but out of knowing. "Lord, open his eyes." A breath. "Not my will, but yours." Because deep down, she understood something most people don't want to face. When something isn't built on truth, it will eventually be tested. And when that test comes, everything hidden will be revealed. Soft pause. And that moment was closer than any of them realized. Because the night before the wedding wasn't just a conversation, it was a line being drawn, and once it was crossed, there would be no going back. The night before the wedding, everything came into focus, not gradually, not gently, all at once. Lenora stood just outside the rehearsal hall, the soft hum of voices and laughter spilling through the doors. Inside, people celebrated, smiles, music, glasses clinking. It looked like joy. But Lenora didn't feel joy. She felt weight. Still, she stepped forward, because no matter what her spirit had been warning her, this was still her son, and love shows up. She adjusted the strap of her purse and held the photo album close to her chest. The same one she had worked on for weeks, the one filled with every memory she couldn't put into words. She whispered softly under her breath, "Holy Spirit, guide me." And then she walked in. Vanessa was near the entrance, perfect as ever, poised, composed, the kind of woman who knew exactly how she appeared. and made sure everyone else saw it too. When she noticed Lenora, she smiled, that same practiced smile, but her eyes didn't soften. "Vanessa," Lenora said gently, stepping closer. "I brought something for you and Caleb." She held out the photo album. "For tomorrow? Or tonight? Whenever you both have a moment." For a brief second, Vanessa looked at it. Then she didn't take it. Instead, Vanessa stepped closer, her voice low, controlled, and in that moment, the room faded. The noise disappeared, because what she said next would change everything. "After tomorrow," she said softly, "you see, there won't really be a place for you in our lives." There it was, not hinted, not hidden, spoken, clear, final. Lenora didn't react, but something inside her settled. Not confusion, not hurt alone, clarity. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her voice lowering even more. "You've done your job," she continued. "You raised him." A pause. "But Caleb and I are building something new." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the photo album, then back up. "And that doesn't include this." The words didn't rise. They didn't need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to. And for a moment, Lenora felt it. The pull, the urge to speak, to correct, to defend, to say everything she had held in for years, to remind her who stood in front of her. A mother who had prayed that boy through fevers, through fear, through nights no one else saw. But she didn't, because something stronger than emotion rose up in her spirit. Not anger, authority, not loud, but steady. She looked at Vanessa, really looked this time, and what she saw wasn't just a woman, it was a heart, not surrendered, a life built on control. And for the first time, Lenora understood clearly. This wasn't something she could fix. This was something only God could expose. Vanessa let out a soft breath, almost amused by the silence. "Honestly," she added quietly, "I've been patient long enough." Her lips curved slightly. "Don't come tomorrow." A pause. "Spare everyone the discomfort." There it was again. Not just rejection, removal. And this time, it reached deeper. Not into pride, but into identity. Because for 60 years, Lenora had known exactly who she was. Not just a mother, a woman covered by God. And suddenly, she was being told she didn't belong. The room behind them continued like nothing had happened. Laughter, music, voices. But in that quiet space between two people, everything had changed. And instead of responding, she turned inward. "Lord, you take care of what I can't see." Because she knew this wasn't a moment to fight. This was a moment to release. Lenora slowly lowered the photo album. Her hands were steady, but her heart felt the weight. Not confusion, clarity. And in that clarity came a decision, not made out loud, not explained, but settled, right there. "I hear you," she said softly, not agreeing, not submitting, but acknowledging. Because she didn't need to argue. Truth doesn't need defending in the presence of deception. She turned, walked away. No scene, no raised voice, no explanation. Just quiet, obedient, release. Later that night, Lenora sat at the edge of her bed with the scrapbook open. But this time, she did something she had never done before. She reached for a small piece of paper, and slowly, carefully, she wrote, "Lord, if this path is not from you, close the door in a way he cannot ignore." Her hand paused. Then one more line. "Protect him, even if it breaks my heart to watch." She folded the note gently and placed it inside the scrapbook. The morning of the wedding came quietly. No storm, no sign from the outside that anything was about to change. Sunlight slipped gently through the curtains. Birds moved through the yard. The world continued as if everything was normal. But inside Lenora Whitaker's home, nothing felt normal. She woke before the alarm, not out of habit, but because her spirit was already awake. For a moment, her body moved the way it always had. She walked into the kitchen, set the kettle on the stove, reached for her favorite mug, the one Caleb had given her years ago, with slightly crooked lettering that read, "World's Best Mom." Her fingers lingered on it, just a second longer than usual. Then the memory came back, not softly, sharp. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore." Lenora closed her eyes, not to escape it, but to face it, because she knew today would require a decision. Not emotional, spiritual. She sat at the kitchen table, the steam from her tea rising slowly in front of her. Her hands rested gently around the cup, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She could go. She could put on the pale blue dress hanging in her room, sit quietly in her seat, smile when expected, clap when everyone else clapped. Pretend. Pretend she hadn't heard those words. Pretend nothing in her spirit had been warning her for months. Pretend everything was right. And for a moment, her heart wanted that. Because love doesn't easily step back. But then another voice rose. Not loud, not forceful, clear. The same voice that had carried her through years of raising 6 children. Through nights she didn't know how she would make it. Through moments when all she had was faith. "Trust me." Lenora inhaled slowly, because she understood what that meant. Trusting God doesn't always look like doing something. Sometimes it looks like stepping back, even when it hurts, even when people won't understand, even when it costs you something. Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from Caleb. "Morning, Lenora. We're heading to the venue soon. I can't wait to see you." Her heart tightened. That little boy was still there, the one who used to run into her arms, the one who once said he would take care of her. And now, he was stepping into something she didn't have peace about. Her fingers hovered over the phone. She could call him, warn him, tell him everything. But she didn't, because she had already placed him somewhere safer than her words could reach. In God's hands. Another message came, then another. Family, friends. "Where are you? You're not running late, are you? Everyone's asking about you." The pressure built quietly, not dramatic, but steady, the kind of pressure that makes you question yourself. What if I'm wrong? What if I should go? What if this ruins everything? For a brief moment, fear tried to speak, but Lenora had learned something long ago. Fear asks questions, but faith already knows the answer. She stood slowly, walked into her room. The dress hung neatly, untouched. She reached out, ran her hand across the fabric. This was the dress she had imagined wearing on one of the happiest days of her life. And now, it felt like something else entirely, not rejection, release. She let her hand fall. "I won't go." The words were quiet, but they carried weight, not bitterness, not pride, obedience. She sat down at the edge of the bed and pulled the photo album into her lap, flipped it open. Page after page of Caleb's life, every moment she had prayed him through. Her eyes softened. "Lord." Her voice barely above a whisper. "I trust you with him." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from doubt, but from surrender. because surrender doesn't mean you don't care. It means you trust God more than your own understanding. Her phone rang. This time, it was her sister, Deborah. "Lenora, where are you?" Deborah's voice came through quickly. "I'm already at the church. People are starting to notice you're not here." Lenora closed her eyes gently. "I'm not coming." Silence. "What do you mean you're not coming?" Deborah's voice dropped. "This is Caleb's wedding." Lenora's voice stayed calm. "I can't sit there, Deborah, and celebrate something I don't have peace about." A pause. Then softer. "She told me, I'm not part of this family." Deborah's breath caught. "She said that?" "Yes." Another silence. Longer this time. "Oh my God." "I'm not angry," Lenora said gently. "I'm not trying to stop anything." Her hand rested over the photo album. "I'm just stepping back." Deborah didn't argue this time, because even through the phone, she could hear it. This wasn't emotion. This was conviction. By the time the church bells rang, Lenora Whitaker was still sitting in her home, not running late, not changing her mind, still, peaceful, covered, because she had done what she knew to do. And now, she was leaving the rest to God. She didn't know what was happening at the church, didn't know what Caleb was about to see, what was about to be revealed. By the time the church filled, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Guests settled into their seats. Soft music played. Flowers lined the aisle. From the outside, it was beautiful. But inside, something had already begun to shift. Caleb Whitaker stood quietly in a side room, adjusting his cuff. Voices moved around him, friends laughing, trying to lighten the moment. "Big day, man," someone said. Caleb nodded. But something didn't sit right. Not fear, not nerves, something deeper. A hesitation he couldn't explain. And for once, he didn't ignore it. He stepped back slightly, took a breath, and whispered under his breath, "God, if something's not right, show me." It wasn't a long prayer, but it was enough. His phone buzzed in his hand. A new email. No name, no subject line, just a single sentence. "You deserve to know before you say, 'I do.'" His chest tightened. For a moment, he almost ignored it. But something in him wouldn't let him. He opened it. At first, it didn't make sense. Screenshots, fragments of conversations, numbers. Then, it did. Messages between Vanessa and another man. Not distant, not old, recent, clear. His grip tightened. No. But his eyes kept moving, because there was more. Attached beneath the messages was a document, highlighted, a section of the prenup. He read it once, then again. And this time, it landed. Not protection, control. Structured terms, outlining future income redistribution, percentages, conditions, not partnership, extraction. And at the bottom, a line that didn't belong to a legal document. This was never about love. Caleb stepped back. The room around him faded. The noise, the laughter, the movement, all of it disappeared. Because suddenly, everything connected. The late nights, the deflection, the quiet discomfort he never named. And deeper than that, the uneasiness he had been ignoring. The one his mother had been carrying in silence. And in that moment, he didn't push it down. He didn't explain it away. He didn't protect the illusion. He faced it. "God," he whispered again, his voice lower now. "Thank you for showing me." Because now, it wasn't confusion. It was clarity. He walked out of the room, not rushed, not angry, just certain. Each step grounded, each breath steady. Guests turned as he passed. Something in his presence had shifted. And when he reached the front, The music slowed, then stopped. The room quieted. Vanessa stood at the end of the aisle, composed, waiting, expecting. But Caleb didn't move toward her. Instead, he turned to face the room, and in a voice that didn't rise, but didn't waver, he said, "There won't be a ceremony today." A ripple moved through the crowd. Confusion. Whispers. Vanessa's expression tightened. "Caleb, what are you doing?" she said quickly, stepping forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply held up his phone and looked at her. "You knew?" 2 words, but they carried everything. For a brief moment, she tried to recover. "That's not what it looks like." But this time, he didn't chase the explanation, because truth had already spoken. "You built something that wasn't real," he said quietly, "and you expected me to stand in it." The room felt it, not just the words, the weight behind them. Vanessa's composure slipped. "This is because of your mother," she said sharply. "She's been against me from the beginning." "No." The word came clean, immediate. She didn't have to say anything. A pause. "I see it now." Silence filled the space, because this time, nothing needed to be uncovered. It already had been. And sometimes, the loudest moment in a room is when truth no longer needs defending. By noon, the church was empty. No celebration, no vows, just quiet, plans undone. But something else remained. Clarity, not forced, not argued, revealed, and miles away, in a quiet home. Lenora Whitaker sat still, unaware of the details, but not unsettled, because when she placed that prayer in God's hands, she didn't need to control the outcome. She trusted it, because she knew, "Lord, you take care of what I can't see." And when God answers a prayer like that, he doesn't whisper the truth. He brings it into the light. And this time, there was no turning back. By that afternoon, the story had already begun to move, not in one direction, but in many. Phone calls spread quickly. Messages passed from one person to another. The wedding didn't happen. Something about betrayal. I heard he walked away. But truth doesn't always arrive first, and it doesn't always arrive clean, because by evening, another version had already begun to take shape, one that didn't focus on what was revealed, but on who could be blamed. Lenora Whitaker sat quietly in her living room, hands resting in her lap. Her phone buzzed beside her. Once, then again. She didn't rush to it, because something in her spirit already understood. This part wasn't over. When she finally picked it up, the messages weren't what she expected. They weren't asking what happened. They were asking about her. "Did you tell Caleb not to go through with it? People are saying you caused this. Lenora, what did you do?" She read each one slowly, not reacting, just receiving, because she recognized what this was. Not confusion, narrative, and it was shifting. Across social media, a photo surfaced. Vanessa, still in her dress, eyes filled with tears. The caption read, "Some people don't know when to step back. Some people can't let go of control." It spread quickly. Comments followed. Sympathy, assumptions, people choosing a side without knowing the truth. Lenora held the phone in her hand for a moment, not shaken, just aware, because she had seen this before. When truth begins to rise, deception doesn't disappear. It adjusts, it redirects, it fights to stay believable. Her phone rang. Deborah. "Lenora, it's getting twisted out there," her sister said, voice tight. "They're saying you interfered, that you've been working against her." Lenora looked out toward the window. The light outside had softened. "Have I?" she asked quietly. The question wasn't defensive. It was settled. "No," Deborah said quickly. "But people don't know that." And there it was. The real tension. Not what happened, but what people believed happened. For a moment, silence filled the space. Then softly, within herself, "Lord." She didn't finish the sentence out loud, but her spirit did. And just like before, peace answered. Not loud, but steady. She wasn't being called to defend herself. She was being called to stand still and let truth finish what it started. "Deborah," she said gently, "I'm not stepping into that." A pause. "But Lenora, if I try to fix how people see this," she continued calmly, "I take it out of God's hands." Silence followed, because even Deborah could hear the difference. This wasn't avoidance. This was faith. Positioned. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. Lenora stood slowly and opened it. And there he was. Caleb. Not dressed for celebration anymore. No jacket, no polish, just present. His face carried it all. Shock, clarity, weight. "Lenora." His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the messages, not the accusations, not the noise. Just truth, standing at her door. "I saw everything," he said. She didn't ask what. She already knew. "And I read something else." He stepped inside slowly, holding the scrapbook. Her heart softened, because she knew exactly what he meant. "I wasn't supposed to open it," he said, voice unsteady. A pause. "But I'm glad I did." He unfolded the small piece of paper carefully, read it again. "Lord, if this path is not from you, close the door in a way I cannot ignore." His voice caught slightly. "You gave this to God." Not a question, a realization. Lenora nodded gently. "I didn't know what else to do." A quiet moment passed between them. "I almost walked into something I couldn't see," Caleb said. She reached for his hand. "But you didn't." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no confusion left. "No," he said softly. "I didn't." Outside, the world was still trying to decide what had happened, still forming opinions, still choosing sides. But inside that small home, something had already been settled, not publicly, but spiritually, because truth had already done its work, and no amount of noise could undo what God had revealed. But the pressure wasn't finished yet, because when truth disrupts something built on deception, it doesn't go unanswered. And what came next would test whether they would stay in faith or step into the fight. In the days that followed, the noise didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. Vanessa didn't disappear quietly, neither did her family. Because when people lose control, they often reach for anything they can to get it back. And this time, they reached for pressure. 2 days after the wedding collapsed, a letter arrived at Lenora's home. Formal, official, cold, legal language filled the page, claims, threats, words like defamation, emotional damages, interference. Lenora read it slowly, not rushed, not shaken, because even though the words were meant to intimidate, her spirit didn't move, not the way it would have years ago, because this wasn't her first storm, and it wouldn't be the one to break her. Later that afternoon, she sat across from Linda Carver, her longtime friend who worked in a law office. Linda skimmed the papers, then looked up with a small shake of her head. "This isn't a case," she said plainly. "It's fear." Lenora tilted her head slightly. "They're trying to scare you into silence," Linda continued. A pause. And if I'm being honest, she leaned forward. They're not just protecting Vanessa, they're protecting something bigger. That word lingered. Bigger. Because suddenly, everything Lenora had felt, everything she had prayed about, started lining up. Not just emotionally, but clearly. Over the next few days, details began to surface. Not forced, not chased, revealed. Financial records, old filings, hidden debts, a pattern. Vanessa's family wasn't just struggling, they were drowning. And Caleb was never just her future husband. He was the solution. The prenup Vanessa had insisted on wasn't protection. It was a pipeline, structured to pull from his future income and redirect it into accounts tied to her family, not partnership, control. And suddenly, Lenora understood something even deeper. This wasn't just deception, it was intention. And intention, when it's hidden long enough, eventually gets exposed. That evening, Lenora sat quietly at her table, the documents spread out in front of her. Not overwhelmed, not rushed, just still, because she knew this was the moment, not to react, but to move the right way. Lord, her voice was soft. You brought this to light? A breath. So you show me what to do with it. Silence, then peace. Clear, steady, not aggressive, but purposeful. And within that peace came direction, not to argue, not to defend, but to reveal. Truth. The right way. At the right time. A few nights later, Vanessa's family arranged a private dinner. Let's clear everything up, they had said. But Lenora already knew. This wasn't about clarity. This was about control. Still, she went. Not alone, but covered. Because when you walk into something led by God, you don't walk in unprepared. The room was polished, elegant, controlled. Vanessa sat beside her father, Richard Hale, composed, as if nothing had happened, as if truth hadn't already begun to rise. Well, Richard said smoothly, I'm glad you decided to come. We need to resolve this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Lenora didn't respond immediately. She simply placed a folder on the table, thick, documented, clear. Then she spoke, calm, measured. This didn't fall apart because of me. A pause. It came apart because it wasn't built on truth. Silence filled the room, and for the first time, no one could shift the story, because truth doesn't move once it's seen, because authority doesn't need volume. She opened the folder. Financial records. A page turned. Bankruptcies. Another page. And this. She slid the prenup forward. Clause 14? The room stilled. In the event of divorce within 5 years, 75% of Caleb's income. Her eyes lifted, transferred to accounts tied to your family. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Even Caleb, who sat beside her, went still. Because now, it wasn't suspicion. It was truth. Right in front of everyone. Vanessa's voice came quickly. That's not what it looks like. But this time, no one rushed to believe her. Because truth had weight. And it doesn't shift easily. Richard's tone hardened. You'll regret making this public. Lenora met his gaze, not angry, not afraid, just certain. I didn't make anything public. A pause. God did. And in that moment, everything broke. Not loudly, but completely, because there was nothing left to hide behind. No image, no performance, no control. Just truth. Exposed. And for the first time, Vanessa had nothing to say. Later that night, as Lenora and Caleb walked out together, the air felt different, lighter, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Caleb stopped beside the car, his voice quieter now, clearer. "Mum?" She turned toward him. "I almost walked into something I couldn't see." A pause. "But you did." She shook her head gently. "No." Her hand rested lightly over his. "God did." Because she knew. This wasn't about her being right. It was about God being faithful. Weeks later, the truth made its way further. Not forced, not pushed, but carried by evidence, by time, by exposure. And slowly, the story shifted. Not in Lenora's favor, in truth's favor. Because truth doesn't belong to people. It belongs to God. That evening, the noise had finally faded. No more messages, no more questions, no more voices trying to make sense of it all. Just quiet. Lenora Whitaker sat on the front porch, a warm cup resting between her hands. The sky stretched out in deep navy blue, small stars beginning to appear one by one. The kind of stillness you don't rush. Caleb sat beside her, not speaking at first, just breathing. Because some moments don't need words, they need space. After a while, he leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "I keep thinking about how close I was," he said quietly. Lenora turned her head just enough to look at him. "You were closer than you knew," she said gently. A small pause settled between them. "But you didn't stay there." Caleb nodded slowly. "I didn't see it, Lenora," he admitted. "Not until it was right in front of me." Lenora's expression softened. "Sometimes we don't," she said. Another quiet breath passed. Then Caleb glanced down at his hands. "I thought I had everything figured out," he said, "like I was building something solid." His voice trailed off. Lenora didn't interrupt. She let him finish. "But it wasn't real." The words hung there for a moment. Not heavy, just honest. Lenora shifted slightly in her chair, the porch light casting a soft glow across her face. "Real things don't have to be forced," she said quietly. Caleb let out a slow breath. Then, after a moment, "You never tried to stop me," he said. Lenora smiled faintly. "No." A pause. "I prayed." He nodded, almost to himself. "I know," he said softly. Another silence settled between them, the kind that feels full, not empty. Then Lenora looked out toward the horizon again, her voice calm, steady. "When you give something to God—" Caleb lifted his head slightly. She continued, gently. "He doesn't just fix it." A soft breath. "He reveals what you were never meant to carry." The words settled between them, not rushed, not explained, just understood. Caleb sat back slowly, and for the first time in days, his shoulders loosened, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was clear, and beside him, Lenora rested peacefully, because she had done what she knew to do. She had trusted God with what she could not control. And sometimes the greatest peace comes not from holding things together, but from placing them in the right hands.
If you've ever felt overlooked, pushed aside, or misunderstood, remember this. You don't have to defend yourself when God is already standing for you. Just stay in faith and let Him handle it.